My name is Ashley Cisneros, and I'm one of the public policy interns here at the Chamber, along with Chad Foreman back there in the corner. So really quick, I'm going to do some introductions. I have the pleasure of introducing today our representatives over here from District 18. Representative Mitzi Epstein is number 1. So as a representative for the people of District 18, Representative Epstein values listening to her community and working collaboratively to improve the quality of life for Arizonans. Her priorities include strong schools, youth sports programs, entrepreneurial opportunities, and vibrant arts, all of which promote a strong economy. She has worked as a computer systems analyst for multinational companies and has operated a small business here in Arizona. Her activities in education include sitting on the Kyrene Elementary School District Governing Board, Vice President and Legislative Chair of the Arizona PETA. She has worked successfully with education professionals to improve transparency of operations while always keeping the focus on student achievement. Representative Epstein has spent years organizing community advocacy programs connecting parents, businesses, and elected officials to address education and economic issues. And a quick also introduction for Representative Jennifer Jermaine. Legislative District 18 has been the home of Representative Jermaine and her family, a husband and a daughter, for 7 years. She received her master's degree in public administration from ASU and decided early on that her calling is to work for positive change within the public sector. She has spent many years in the nonprofit sector helping people start and succeed in small businesses. Representative Jermaine is the co-founder of Stronger Together Arizona and We the People Summit, both of which empower individuals to strategize and collaborate to influence public policy. Her legislative priorities include restoring education funding, protecting civil rights, and honoring shared values with constituents by listening, responding to concerns, and working across the aisle to achieve meaningful progress. Please give a round of applause.
Morning, everybody, again. We're going to do a little different format. I've got some questions for our 2 representatives, and hopefully we'll have some time. We'll open it up to some questions from the floor as well and stuff. So with that, we'll start. What were your main priorities for the 2019 session, and how have they done thus far? Jennifer, you want to start with you, and we'll just kind of rotate.
Oh, thanks. Well, one of my biggest priorities is to get more funding for district additional assistance and to restore some of the building and maintenance funding. And that's actually just starting now with the budget negotiations. So we have not started progress on that yet, but we're hoping in the next few weeks we can really get that going. The governor has made it a priority in his budget. So we're hoping that with that we'll be able to restore some of that funding to our public schools.
Mitzi, how about you?
Also, funding for schools is always number 1 for me. And we have the budget update today is that we had thought we were going to have $900 million more in one-time funds, and that's turned into $840 million. We had thought we were going to have $200 million more in ongoing funds, and that is now $150 million from the Finance Committee meeting yesterday. So that's disappointing. And of course, when you hear that we have a surplus, it's a surplus from one year to the next. It's not a surplus of what we have versus what we need. Our needs are far outweighing those numbers. So that's a little disappointing. But I believe, and yesterday we were at a meeting with ABEC, the Arizona Business and Education Coalition, where there seemed to be some bipartisan support around the idea of working in the interim on long-term solutions for Arizona's revenue, especially for our schools.
I'm actually remiss. Senator Bowie was supposed to be here this morning, and Sean unfortunately has missed, I think, the whole session this week for the first time ever. He thought he had the flu. It turned out to be pneumonia. So he's home in bed. Yeah, he ended up at the hospital, and they said, "You don't have the flu, sir. You have pneumonia." So Sean does apologize for not being here. He told Terry he owes Terry big time, so she's counting this jet. So, but I just want to say, Sean's been a great partner with the Chandler Chamber over the years in service, and we really do just have him here today. So Our next question is, what are the biggest concerns regarding the budget this year? And what are your three top priorities for the budget? Mitzi, we'll start with you.
On the budget, I don't even, is this working?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. For me, there's one particular improvement we must make that is beyond schools, because schools are always number one. So let's put that aside for just a moment, and let's talk about our disability community, the developmentally disabled in particular. This is a group that was been cut 10 years ago, and we've never restored their funding. And so now we have a situation where the folks who go out and are the direct care workers, the people who help people who are developmentally disabled, think of the people who are changing adult diapers and helping people with their everyday feeding and taking care of themselves, helping them to have productive lives. And if you've ever gone to Tempe Center for Rehabilitation, you know it's all about the productivity. And that needs to be restored to the tune of about $42 million in order to make them a little more whole so that we can get back to two things. Number one, it's the right thing to do for our DD community. And number two, let's give people not just a job, but a career. And so we used to have direct care workers could become direct care professionals, and could become supervisors. It was a career path. Lately, it has become, we just have this entry-level minimum wage job of direct care worker, and we need to give these folks a chance to make it a career. So that's an area that I have a lot of passion around. Fortunately, I think there's some bipartisan support for restoring some of that at least, so I'm heartened to see how that will come out in the budget negotiations. But I hope that's something you'll all watch for. There's going to be many things talked about. That's an important one that may get overlooked.
So I have two big priorities. Number one is restoring our funding for our community colleges. About 10 years ago, Maricopa Community Colleges and Pima Community Colleges lost all of their state funding, and not a penny of it has been restored since the Great Recession. Between the two community college systems, that would be about $15 million. It's not a big bump. And also making sure that we're protecting our HERF funding so that we are investing in our infrastructure for the long term. We have roads that are falling apart. We have bridges and dams that are structurally unsound. These could be catastrophic events. If a dam breaks, it could flood a city. It could mean that we don't have the drinking water that we need. These are all preventable disasters, and we need to start investing in the prevention and the shoring up of our infrastructure in the state of Arizona.
Water is always close to my heart. What are some of your future strategies or initiatives for good water policy? We'll start with you.
Well, my husband is in the water industry, so I have been recused from voting on a lot of the big water policy issues. But really, we need to look at new methods of reclamation. We need to look at filtration systems. We need to look at restoring our underground aquifer system. Again, shoring up our dams to make sure that we have proper storage tanks for all of our water systems. And making sure, I know Chandler is in the process of building a new treatment plant, making sure that our cities have the funding to be able to provide the infrastructure that we need to be able to live in our cities.
Mitzi?
Everything Jennifer said always. Plus, I think for us, expanding on groundwater a little further, as you may know, and as Rick can explain way better than I can, but we have active management areas in our major metropolitan areas where we keep track of the water. We measure it. We know what's going on with our groundwater system in these areas. But in our more rural areas, it's the wild, wild west. And we have said, hey, if you own this patch of ground, you can run a well and get the water, pull the water out of there. And up till now, with the technology we've had, that has been fine. But I've watched fabulous Gina Cobb explain to her constituents from time to time, it's not the 1800s anymore. You know, we now probably need to start measuring the water that is pulled out of our rural groundwater, our aquifers and so on, because we are having some folks come in from out of state, out of country, building an enormous well, pulling an enormous amount of water out, and water doesn't just stay underneath your property. We all were sharing that water, now one large well goes in and we're not sharing it anymore. And that's probably not the way we want to do things. So we need at the very least to start to measure our aquifers and our groundwater that's being pumped. And let people start to work out, okay, what really is fair? Because the old notion of, I own this land so I can pump as much water as I want from this aquifer that runs under everybody's land, we need to rethink that in our rural communities.
Water policy is a very complicated issue, and I do commend the governor this year on passing the drought contingency plan, but that's just the first step in many steps. But you are right, the rural areas are challenged in terms of tapping some of the aquifers. SRPF people understand that the Verde shed and things like that are very susceptible to that going on. Can you speak to what you think the best option for taxing digital goods? It's a tough subject at the legislature. The bill is tried a couple of times over the last couple of years. I think right now it's kind of in limbo again. But what's your best thoughts on digital goods, Mitzi?
We in Arizona, our taxpayers have chosen to pay for the things we need, roads, education, public safety, with sales tax. Our voters have said, we like sales tax best, so around 45% of the budget any given year is from sales tax. So if we want to pay for the things we have from sales tax, as the voters have indicated, we should keep that base as wide as can be. I'm a big fan of broaden the base, lower the rate. So if we impinge on digital goods, and we start to say, well, this thing that used to be a tangible good and we tax it, now we're going to call that a service and we're not going to tax it. And this other thing, oh, that's a service, now we're not going to tax it. We're decreasing the base. And decreasing the base is really not the best way to run an economy. So we want to keep our base as wide and fair as we can. If we start to call some things like Microsoft Word is a great example. It has been taxed. You buy it off the shelf, it's tangible, you can perceive it. But now, Microsoft Word is something you use in the cloud, and Microsoft automatically updates it. You don't have to do manual updates, so they're calling that a service. But here's the thing. It's still a thing that you use, and it's a thing that you can perceive, and more importantly, with the tax courts and the legislature has determined, if you can measure it, then it's taxable, like helium. You can't see it, can't touch it, but you can measure it. So helium is a tangible good, it's taxed. Similarly, some of our digital goods should be seen that way. And just because Microsoft might start to call it software as a service, doesn't mean it really is a service. It's still something that I download to my computer, I'm using it, it should remain taxed because, again, it's broaden the base so that we can reduce the rate.
Yeah.
I sit on the government committee, so I get to talk to our city council liaisons pretty much on a daily basis. One thing that people are not thinking about when it comes to this digital goods tax is how it's going to affect our cities. When this came up last year, City of Phoenix came out and said, you know, this is going to blow a $6 million hole in our first responder budget. Personally, I don't mind paying a tax on things like Netflix if it means that the fireman is going to show up at my house if my house is on fire. That's my personal opinion. We need to take a longer, harder look at exactly what this will do to city budgets, to county budgets, to anybody who gets that TBT transaction money that comes through each level of taxation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So what are your overriding economic and business priorities for the state of Chandler? As a business organization of the Chamber, we're also great advocates of public policy, but can you answer? We'll start with Jennifer.
One of the things I'm really proud that I was able to be a part of is working with Representative Winokur on his one-stop business setup shop. It's going to be a project of the Arizona Commerce Authority where people can go to just one website, put in all your information to start a business, and it populates all the different state and local agencies with all the information that you need to get your business up and running. So streamlining, starting businesses, streamlining, making one stop for you to take care of all of your business needs at the regulatory level.
Mitzi?
I think it's important to support our businesses by making sure that our locally owned businesses are as strong as they can be, and that means that they need the workforce, the best workforce they can get. So our community colleges are always a great place to go to make sure that people can get access to the best skills they need for the workforce at the least cost and least likely to come into too much student debt. We also want to make sure that our universities are affordable and that we have a smooth path from community college to university so that students can get the best bang for their buck on preparing themselves for the workforce. We hear all the time that the workforce, there is a shortage of people to do the jobs. We have, the construction industry is booming. Most of our revenue in the state is coming from increases in construction, and we have a workforce shortage in the construction industry. So we really want to be making sure that our opportunities for people to be prepared for these jobs are wide open, and that we're encouraging people to look into careers in a lot of different fields than they might have thought of. One of our challenges is with kids. In our school districts are working on it all the time. If your only view is your little retail area, you see people flipping hamburgers, you see the bus driver, you see the Uber driver, then you tend to think that's all that I can do. But what we want to do is help more people see more job opportunities with job fairs, community colleges, access to universities.
I don't want to commend former Councilmember Winiger, who's now Legislator Winiger, because he'll probably bribe me for saying it, but Jeff and I worked on that small business team in Chandler, where it's a one-stop kind of a shop, where we sent out a whole team out to a business. You want to start the pizza joint, the hairdresser, whatever it might be, and so you go from A to Z. And so I'm glad Jeff's doing that on the state level. It's simple stuff. It's not a matter of arguing about digital goods or whatever, but it's simple.
It is, and it's, I have to commend the coders and the algorithm writers because they're the ones who are making it all possible. Technology is making it possible that we can build a one-stop interface and populate all the different regulatory agencies at the same time.
It's common sense politics, so it's great. So question on bipartisan success you guys have had this year. I know there's been several bills that have gotten through the legislature. Senator Bowie had one recently that he got through. Can you talk about some of the bipartisan successes that Jennifer will start to do?
Well, I actually have a bill that's still alive. It's going to go to the Senate floor next week. It's a task force to look at missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we got it out of the House of Representatives unanimously, 60-0. Speaker Bowers has been an amazing partner to work with on that project. And then I'm also working with Senator David Farnsworth on some homeowner rights bills that are coming through the House in the next few weeks.
Mitzi?
Not so much this session because I tend to work in a longer view and I'll speak to our 2-year cycle that really decreases our ability to work together by a lot. But for the interim, again, John Kavanaugh has been a champion for working on some of our homeowner and renters issues. And so we had a bill that was very much, we worked with him to help alleviate the problem that we have in Tempe very much. In Chandler, it's a bit of a problem. In Paradise Valley, it's a huge problem of a party house. So we have to do something about the fact that Airbnb is great for entrepreneurs, but if the house next door to you becomes a reckless, noisy, everything going on every weekend, then we need to fix that. So the first step was his bill that was very bipartisan to develop it. I've worked with a lot of stakeholders in Tempe who've been working with him as well. And the bill basically says if the police come to your door because you're too loud, too raucous, the neighborhood doesn't like it, then we have to know who is the owner. Because just citing the people at the party isn't getting it done. It's a whole bunch of new renters next week. So we want to make sure we know who is the owner of this property and that the police and the city can contact that person and let them know you've got to put a lid on it. This is a neighborhood, it's not an event center. So that bill was the first step, and we'll continue to work with him on making sure that our neighborhoods are taking care of the people in the neighborhood and the residences first, because that's the reason people bought their home.
As every bill has, there's always the unintended consequences, and that one's been a challenge for a lot of neighborhoods as well. There's been bipartisan support for charter reform this session, and the bill, I think, sounds like it's going to fail. Can you speak what happened and what's the best way forward to get a bipartisan agreement to have charter school reform. We know charter schools are great, they're a great addition to our cities, but they also need to play on a level.
And it began, I really recommended that we start with, what are the problems? What are the problems that we, Republicans and Democrats, agree, this is a problem, we should fix this? And then we said, what can be some of the solutions? That became Senator Brophy McGee was delegated as the person to run the bill, so that's fine. Let's continue to work together and put enough in there that it actually becomes a strong measure of accountability. And that's not what we got. And it has to do with the process. The process was the lobbyists from the Charter School Association had far more sway than anybody else in putting that bill together. And every time we came up with another option, that lobbyist said no, and therefore it wasn't allowed to be in the bill. And that's not what our job is. Our job is to listen to the lobbyists from many different areas and from the consumers and hear, what do you want? And our consumers want to know how our dollars are being spent. And that's not what the bill had in it eventually. And so we had our caucus and our Democratic side of the Charter School Reform Study Group had many suggestions that just didn't get very far, and some of them are far more technical than we get into in this number of minutes, but I'm happy to talk with you offline if you want to get into the weeds on that. The process is what matters, and I think it's important that we are not going to stop. We're going to keep pulling our bipartisan Charter School Reform Study Group back together and try to look at how can we make some headway on this.
I wasn't really involved in the charter school debate this session, just kind of sitting on the periphery, on the outside, looking at what good examples there are out there. Great Hearts has a good example of financial transparency that we can look at as a model for that industry. If you go to their website, all their financials are up on their website. But we need to have more people involved in taking a deep look at what needs to be done in that industry.
Great, thank you very much. It's a challenging kind of thing. It's like water. You got to get both sides to agree, and there's got to be some compromise going on when you do something like that. And some people dig their heels in on both sides of the aisle, and unfortunately nothing happened, which I don't think is great for the state and for the taxpayers as well. Reducing youth unemployment, increasing workforce development, Mitzi touched on a little earlier, but can you guys speak to what's the best way of trying to reduce the younger unemployment and also increasing workforce development? You know, our trades are really suffering from not having a lot of qualified workers. How do you see that playing out, especially in the legislature? Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Oh goodness, I actually had this discussion with my in-laws the other night. One of the things that we aren't seeing right now, people are staying in the workforce longer. So the people at the top are not cycling off those top rungs and allowing others to move up the ladder. So please retire.
George just did, right?
but really, we have.
Jerry, you're last enough.
In several of our industries, we've got real bottlenecks. So for our healthcare industries, we don't have enough internship opportunities available to meet their licensing requirements. So doing things like investing in Paradise Valley Community College, where they're looking to build a nursing incubator, to be able to do a simulation of half of their internship hours through their clinic at the community college, would allow for a lot more nurses to be trained in Arizona. And we know that when people are trained in Arizona, they tend to stay in Arizona and build their careers. We have a vast shortage of healthcare workers. Creating programs like the one that's being proposed for Paradise Valley Community College will ease that clog in the pipeline for workers coming through.
Customers. The best way to make sure we have more jobs is make sure that we have more customers. So we want an economy where we don't have people bottom out with the lowest possible pay, and we're doing some things with public policy that are starting to improve that. But the bottom line is, if we want to have more jobs, then businesses need to have more customers. I've been asking small businesses this for many years, and the answer is pretty much always the same. If I could give you a little tax cut or a bunch more customers, what would you prefer? And they want more customers, because that's what makes them hire more people. A tax cut generally gives them more profits, yay, profits. But if we want to have more jobs, then we need to make sure we have more customers, which means we need to make sure that we're providing livable wages and not just entry level. We want to make sure that we are providing the public policies that support a career path with advancement. Which is why something like the blow dry bill was a step in the wrong direction. It was wrong on two counts. One is it's going to be not safe for consumers, and two is it's not really very good for creating a career path. So the blow dry bill, as you may have heard in the news a little bit, was that it passed, and it allows anybody to take a class, and they wanted it to be like 30 to 40 hours in sanitation to learn how not to spread lice from one head to another, and what to do if you see MRSA, which has happened. I've talked to salon owners who said they had an outbreak of MRSA in their salon and had to shut the salon down for 2 days to re-sanitize the whole thing. So there really is a lot to do with this job, and it was offensive to 20,000 hairstylists out there to hear various legislators and politicians demean their work. And I don't think any of us should be demeaned in our work by the way people talk about our job. And frankly, when people stood up on the floor of the House and reduced this fairly complex job of trying to make sure they're keeping people safe and not spreading disease from one head to another, it was reduced to, I know how to shampoo my hair, therefore this job is meaningless. It was rude and infuriating, in fact. And people in this industry are everywhere. So it was an unkind and infuriating thing to do. But I want to give credit to people who do all kinds of jobs, and that they know what they're doing. And that we want to make sure that that is not just an entry-level job, but a career path with advancement. And that's the nice thing about getting that cosmetology license. They start out at one level, and they can move on to become an entrepreneur. If they're just doing the unskilled job of blow-drying hair, and they don't have to have very much licensing to do it, what kind of a path is that? That's not a career path. But the license and staying in school helps them have a career path towards entrepreneurship, and all of that career success for them means they're your customer. Then they can become your customer in your restaurant, in your local business, in your marketing, in your other kinds of firms. So it's all about, let's support people's wages to make sure everybody gets a livable wage so that they can come and be your customer.
Jennifer, you touched on something interesting about healthcare workers and the need for healthcare workers. The governor, I can't remember the name of this program, about helping teachers come out of school without debt to teach. There was an interesting story the other day about NYU in New York that they have an endowment that their medical students will not come out of school with any debt. So there's requirements to stay in the medical school, teach, be a doctor in certain places. Where is it in the budget? I know the governor's proposed increasing that. Do you see it also maybe going over to healthcare? We do have a shortage of nurses and doctors in the state.
Yeah, so there is a bill going through the legislature right now, and I think it's been diverted. They call it the budget soup. So any bill that has money attached to it goes into the budget soup and gets flushed out through the budget process. But there is a bill coming through that will not give them free education, but vastly supplement medical school and nursing school for people who agree to either go into rural healthcare or to serve in like the VA or Indian health systems for a number of years after graduation. It's similar to the way that AmeriCorps kind of works.
Right. Mitzi?
On healthcare?
Well, I'm adding the additional dollars for the teacher program, a healthcare program. Where do you stand on that?
Oh, any program that helps a person to advance their career is a step in the right direction. Certainly, we had a bill come through Ways and Means that was particularly good at doing that. They noticed that we have a problem in our homeless population that is specifically youth and families, and they said, and this is Sylvia Allen's bill, I recall, that she said, you know, we need to take care of this population, and there are many programs out there that are exactly help this group, this family that needs a bridge. They were okay, something happened, they lost their job, now they're homeless. What do? They're gonna be productive again, they need a bridge to get there. So there are many programs, and for $10 million, which is what the state is going to put into the program, they can get that bridge back up to being productive again. And so she went out and found the money in the form of people who live outside of Arizona, but own land in Arizona. When they sell that land, they should pay a capital gains tax, just like we do when we sell land in Arizona. Yeah, but it's not being collected. And the problem was DOR didn't know about it. So they worked with the title companies to say, you know what, if the title company will report to DOR when we've had a land sale from an out-of-state owner, we can collect the capital gains on that, and that can go straight to helping this wonderful program that works. So investing in people is always a good idea.
Great. Okay, we have some time for some questions. So, question?
I'm very concerned about education and healthcare, but I'm also concerned about traffic safety. And I was wondering if you heard anything further on House Bill 2318 that would prevent us from using our phones while driving. I know it seems to be stalled in the House.
So 2318 is going to be coming back to the House for a concurrence vote. My understanding is that Representative Campbell has agreed to the concurrence, and we're just waiting for it to come up to a vote. That is the House Majority Leadership is the one who schedules that vote. So,
Rusty Bowers.
Rusty Bowers, Warren Peterson, and Becky Nutt.
So I guess the question is it going to come out of the House? I mean, the public has spoken. You know, I always, it's a sad state that we lost a police officer recently by a person admitting texting driving. We lose people every day that people who won't admit it. But does it look like it's going to come out, or do we need to help push that to the legislature?
It definitely has 31 votes.
Okay.
It has all the Democratic votes. They want to get more Republicans on board, but it definitely has enough votes to pass if they will bring it to the floor for a vote.
Okay. What we don't want to happen is we have Tempe with their own bill, and other cities are doing this, and we end up with this piecemeal all over.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you know,
Tempe and Tucson and Marana have primary offense. So if you even have your phone in your hand, it's a primary offense. I believe Tempe's $100 the first time you get caught. But right now it is piecemeal, and we are at the point where we do need a statewide regulation.
Thank you. Other questions?
I know Jennifer mentioned that she had to recuse herself on certain voting things because of her husband. When you were talking about the charter school reform, is Eddie Farnsworth on that? Like, is he recused from voting on things like that? Or how does that work?
Yes, let's talk a little bit about our ethics and code of conduct in the state legislature. He has not, to my knowledge, ever recused himself on any charter school legislation. And yes.
So when Jennifer does it, are you doing that? Or are you being asked to recuse yourself?
I am voluntarily recusing myself from those things because I do believe we need to be transparent with our conflicts of interest. I sit on the House Code of Conduct Committee. We have yet to meet. I'm really excited to get started on writing the Code of Conduct. So,
Other questions? Kurt?
This morning, I've heard the phrase restoration of funding several times. My thought is that in most, modern organizations, in the interest of efficiency, they base their funding request on current and future needs, and then prioritize those against current and future revenue sources. So, restoration of funding back to 2010, the 1800s, and we talked a little bit about that as well, really doesn't seem that relevant. Should we be going to more of a zero-based budgeting approach, and how do we get there?
Kurt? Yes. That's a great idea. You know, let's take the time to figure out what do our schools need. That would be a great idea. We've never done that, and we really need to do that, so I'm so glad you brought it up, because honestly, that whole restore funding to 2008 levels is just a shorthand. We can't spend the time to say this is what our schools need, and this is where the revenue should come from very often, but we want people to know what our commitment is. And so my commitment is that 2008 levels is please, let's at least do that, because we're going forward. And if we want to go forward in Arizona, then we need to have the funding to do what our kids need to really be ready for those future work jobs and their future life, and the technology and the understanding of the bigger world. With so many things going on in the world right now, we really need students that understand the bigger world, and that means they need a little more than the education that they have been provided in the past. So thank you for recommending that, yeah, we should look at our schools and see what do we need for our future, and not just be saying that we need to restore funding, but let's say what do we need for our future, and that's the second interim group that I hope to pull together in a bipartisan way that will start with what do our schools need, and then say what's the fair way for the state to pay for it. Right.
You want to comment?
I think Mitzi summed it up perfectly.
Other questions, Gina?
Mine really isn't
She
a
doesn't
question.
need a mic.
I don't need a mic, I'm very loud. I'm an independent voter, and I'm so glad I came this morning, because that's what our country needs in every level of government. We need bipartisanship. We need to get together. I listened to Sandra Day O'Connor about a dozen years ago, and she was a keynote, and she said back in the day, the Democrats and the Republicans would get together, they would discuss bills, they would figure out where can we meet in the middle. She said they used to do it over a beer, and they'd be able to talk, and it was very civil, they cared about one another, and they tried to make a difference for everybody. And you can meet in the middle, and we need more of that with everything. And I applaud both of you ladies. I'm just so glad I came this morning, because it gives me hope for the future, so thank you.
Thank you, Gina, and please know that Sandra Day O'Connor's Chats and Chalupas is continuing. Representative Campbell and Representative Lieberman, they call it the Beer Caucus, and they get together every Wednesday over a beer and try to solve some of these problems and work through disagreements. And I'm able to join when I can, but usually Wednesdays are my day to pick up my daughter at school. But I have regular conversations with both of them.
Great comment. Other questions? Wow, quiet group today. Ladies, I really do appreciate you being here today, and I do, what Gina said, I think bipartisanship, we don't have to agree everything. Councilmember Ware and I are agreed on a lot of things, and not on other things, we've got things done. I think at the city council level, being a nonpartisan situation, I know there was a bill in the legislature to try and make people identify which party they are, and I think that's wrong. I think city councils get a lot of things done, so I appreciate you guys coming. Give a round of applause for everybody.
That one work? Can you hear me? Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about Chandler Unified School District. We have some other great school districts in the room too. But of course, we love our school district, and we'd love to share some information about Chandler Unified. We have had a wonderful community, and man, has it been supportive over the years. We have phenomenal facilities. We have 5 million square feet that we are maintaining on a regular basis, and we have about 5,700 employees. And so for us, it's really important that we secure bond dollars for the future. We currently have an existing bond, and today I'm going to talk to you about our potential upcoming proposed 2019 bond. So a few things that I'd like to do is talk to you about kind of some of the issues we've had examining capital school finance, just briefly, because if on reality, if you wanted me to, I could be here all day to talk to you about school finance, but I have a short period of time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our capital issues that we've had, because it sets the stage for why we've needed a 2015 bond and why we're potentially calling for a bond in 2019. I'm going to talk a little bit about our 2015 bond, because it's done some great things within our community. not only the city of Chandler, but we are also in 2 other municipalities. We are in the town of Gilbert and the town of Queen Creek, and people always say, wow, why is that? You're Chandler unified. And that's because boundaries for school districts were created before municipalities. So we serve 3 different municipalities, Chandler, Gilbert, and Queen Creek. I'm going to talk a little bit about the expenditures that we spent from the 2015 bond and what we're currently doing right now, because those dollars are being used from the 2015 bond. We're going to talk a little bit about the demographics of Chandler and what we see for the future coming, because that's really important as we are about to be built out in Chandler, but we have some growth down that Bell Vista corridor that we'd like to talk about. We also, it's very expensive to maintain 5 million square feet. So I want to tell you about the cost of that. It gives you an idea of what we're taking care of in Chandler. And then we're going to just go over a couple of the things that we need for our school district to be successful, and then the timeline for what that looks like, since you'll be seeing it here at the chamber and then as community members over the next 6 months. All right. If I can get this up. Sorry. I apologize. There we go. Perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so to talk about a little bit about capital finance. For Chandler Unified School District, we really are regulated by obviously the state sets how much money we can spend, not only in our operations, which is called maintenance and operations, but on our capital side. And for Chandler, one of the major cuts that we've seen over the years is capital. Now, we're very fortunate, the legislature approved last year to restore district additional assistance over 5 years, and we're going to be, this year will be in our 2nd year of phasing back in our capital. But this chart is really great because it shows after the Great Recession what took place. We were entitled to certain allocation per child for capital needs and costs. We were entitled $16.7 million, and back in 2008, 2009, right when the Great Recession was beginning, we received about $15.9 million of that. You can see then, after the Great Recession and through that period of time for a while, our capital was cut, and it was cut drastically. We got down to, in 2015, 2016, we received $3 million of the $19 million we were entitled to. So when they talk about a lot of the cuts, what happened to us is our capital funding was cut almost 90% across statewide. And so a lot of school districts who aren't able to pass bonds didn't have money to go out and build schools or repair schools or buy buses because they didn't have the money. So the only place they could take that from was their operating pot, which is 90% almost salaries and benefits. So the only place they could go buy a bus was from their maintenance and operations funds. Here in Chandler, we were very fortunate. We still had bond measures in place. And in 2015, we passed our largest bond because of that. And we passed a $196 million bond. So you can see, over an 11-year period of time, we actually were cut $126 million just in capital over that period of time. So in 2017-18, Governor Ducey put a plan together to restore district additional assistance so that we'll be fully funded with our capital within 5 years. Now, what I do want to say is that even when we were fully funded with capital, we still were asking our voters to approve bonds because our community has an expectation of what they want their facilities to look like. And so we have always passed bonds to make sure that we meet the community's needs, but we weren't having to pass as large of bonds because we were receiving our full allocation in capital. The other area that we saw was a real lack in capital funding related to building renewal and new construction dollars. So for a long time, we were receiving in Chandler, when we were building, 60% of our growth happened in the last 20 years. So when I was saying we have 46,000 students attending Chandler, and 60% of our schools were built in the last 20 years. During that period of time, the majority of those schools were built with School Facilities Board money after a certain point. But after the Great Recession, there was a moratorium on new school buildings and growth. So from 2008 to 2013, there was no new money for new schools. So Carlson Elementary, which is in Chandler, was built in 2010, and bond dollars built that school. That school has about 800 students in it, and that was one of our elementary schools. There was no money from the state to build new schools. Finally, that started to be renewed, and you can see on the right side down at the very bottom. In 2016, it was actually approved in 2015, we were approved for growth at Castile, down in Castile. We built Castile, and we were funded for our second phase of Castile High School. You have to be over capacity now, because the laws have changed, for you to qualify for new growth. And that's important, because even if you're not over capacity, but you're growing in a specific area, if your K through 6, or your 7th through 8th, or your 9th through 12th is not over capacity in those schools, you're not going to get new school funding for those, to build new schools. But we did receive $50 million, and honestly thankful to our legislators here in Chandler. They really stood up because they wanted to change the formula at the legislature, and the team that was part of Chandler that represents us stood up and said, hey, look, we want to protect our taxpayers. Not money for new construction should come from the state fund and not from the local taxpayer for all of it, only for additional things like extra gyms or performing arts centers, and really for the reason that we received extra money. Also, building renewal used to be an entitlement, but it has been cut, and now all we can do is apply for grants. At one time, just a little bit about building renewal, we received a couple $1 million every year for building renewal. That would replace our HVAC units, our rooftops, all of those different things to maintain our facilities. Now, it's a grant system. During the Great Recession, that was almost cut to zero, and it's being brought back, and the governor each year now is putting additional money into building renewal. This year we're up to, or potentially for next year, up to $80 million for the entire state. Remember, Chandler's only one of the districts. There's over 225 school districts within the state. So part of the reason I explained the capital issue is that's one of the reasons we called for a large election in 2015. We knew that we had issues with funding capital within our state, and Chandler was growing. Like I said, we were in 3 different municipalities, and we had a huge growth need down in the East Valley. And so for us, that was Quinn Creek at the time. And so we knew we needed 2 schools there. It's now Auxerre Elementary and Castile High School. And at that time, we didn't have enough bonds left from our 2010 bond to build those schools, so we did a lease purchase. So we said we need to pay off that lease purchase and those schools. That was $45 million that we didn't have in our 2010 bond. And so we asked our voters to pay off that lease. Now it's important now because now Castile has 3,100 students and Auxerre serves almost 1,100 students. So 4,200 students we're serving now because of that. We also knew there was a lot of issues related to safety, and so we put a big measure in place to secure our schools, fencing, but we also then, because we were able to pass a bond, we didn't have to convert a lot of our maintenance and operations money to capital, so we were able to free up our maintenance and operations dollars and have security officers that are shared between our schools. That was a big deal back then, but we didn't have to utilize money from capital to move into operations to cover that. We also knew that we had a huge technology need. It's like a black hole, probably for your businesses and just in general. Technology is expensive. You have to replace it, not just add to it, and so that's always a huge need for every school district in the state. And then we transport a lot of children throughout our district. We have 46,000, but we actually only transport 12,000 of those kids, but it takes 250 buses to get those kids to and from school. And so for us, we have actually not been able to replace buses yet. All we've been able to do is just keep up with our growth to make sure we get kids to and from. We're hopefully going to get to a point where we get to replace vehicles, but we've been growing so much, we've needed every bus we can to get kiddos to school. All right, so a couple things that we did. We asked for $81 million for construction and renovation projects within our school district. We asked for $53 million for security and site improvements throughout our schools, $15 million specifically for HVAC units. And again, just like your home, when your schools become 15 to 20 years old, you start to see those operational plants fail. Our cooling towers are failing, our roofs are starting to have issues, things like that. So big costs related to that. $39 million, most of that, about $17 million was in school buses, a big chunk, another $10 million plus in technology, and we had some other school furnishings throughout our school district. When we built new schools, you have to have furniture that comes in there. They're paid off a little bit different. We also put money in for a new transportation facility. We actually decided to not renovate. We have a current bus yard that you've probably all seen that's really close to here on Hamilton, and we were going to develop our other 4.5 acres. We had 2 different sites for our transportation. We're going to continue with that, but develop our 9.5 acres. We decided to consolidate that, so we shifted some money from a couple of our top lines, and we built our transportation facility that will be finished probably in September of this year, where all of our buses and all of our white fleet will be housed out of, and it's down off of Ocotillo between McQueen and Arizona Avenue. And we felt like that would be better for the city, because when you build a transportation yard, you really don't take it down for another 50 to 75 years. And our transportation yard really impacts the city of Chandler. Being built right there doesn't allow us to have something nice eventually that brings in homes or commercial or anything that actually produces children for our school district located right here. So we thought that it was beneficial not only to the district, but also for the city of Chandler. So that's one of the reasons we moved it out. All right, a couple things just on summary of how we've spent this. We have spent, you can see the arrows, we originally were only going to put about $4.7 million into transportation. We put $15.8 million to build this new facility on 19 acres. And we shifted that from some of our line items within our bond. Administration, when we upgrade a software system like Visions, it's our accounting software system. We bought it to cost us a little bit more than we originally projected, but we also realized that if anything goes down, we have to have a backup generator in our school district, because we're helping 5,700 employees every day on computers, so we better have something to back up. We decided to put in a backup generating station too, and that came out of administration fees. We paid off our lease. We had actually a bigger budget. We had $51 million to pay off the lease. It cost us not quite $45 million. But the biggest area you can see is the new administration construction projects. We had $99 million between construction and renovation, and we've actually spent $128 million. So if the money from the school facilities board had not came through and they had changed those rules and we did not qualify, we would be long gone, done and over with our bond a couple years ago, because we have really taken advantage of that $50 million we have received from the state for new construction. And then we've spent some money on non-administration furniture and equipment. It is all of our technology items. And then we have spent right at what we said we were going to in transportation. I like this chart because, like I said, I want to talk a little bit about the demography in our school district. Chandler and the town of Gilbert and the town of Queen Creek is part of this overall chart. And this chart is, it shows that you can't really see probably from where you're at, but there's a dark blue graph line right here, and then there's the turquoise one, or the green. And the blue represents the number of students that are coming to our school district, kindergarten through 12th grade, who are coming to Chandler Unified. So K-12 enrolled kids in Chandler Unified. The green is actually our school age population, so the kids in our boundaries that actually could go to our school if they chose to. And then the red line on top is our capture rate. It shows how many students of that's a capture rate, it's a percentage. So back in the early 2000s, we captured majority, almost 90% of our students. So almost 90% of school-age children came to our school district. Now, this has decreased, and it's starting to decline more and more. And why is that? Well, we have a lot of competition. We have charter schools now. We've always had private schools and home schools, but with open enrollment and with charter schools, we have over 20 charter schools within our school district. We've started to see that decrease. Now, we really feel like we've done a great job keeping all of our students in Chandler, a majority of our students, because most school districts that look similar to us have a capture rate of 60 to 70% of their students, and they're losing 30 to 40% to competitors like their charter schools. So even though we're continuing to grow, we're going to plateau and peak out there at the very end, we are still going to see a slight decrease overall. In probably about 3 to 4 years, we're going to start to see a decline in our overall student enrollment. But we still are growing. We're not growing in our K through 6 or elementary area, but we are growing in our high schools and junior highs. Birth rates are down. This year we have 700 less children out of Chandler, Gilbert, and Mercy hospitals, the 2 hospitals. But we still have some land and new homes coming in, so we still have that K through growth is still coming in because we're not completely built out. All right, how big are we? This is kind of a quick little fact sheet about how big we are. I've already mentioned it a couple times, but we are now the 2nd largest school district in Arizona. Mesa has around 60,000 students. We have 46,000. We just passed Tucson. Last year we were neck and neck, and now we are actually past Tucson. We have one of the largest employers. We have 5,700, like I said, employees, and our average payroll every 2 weeks is about $9 million. We just have a lot to take care of. I always say we're bigger than most Midwest cities. We are large. We're definitely bigger than my hometown. I graduated with 35 kids and no stoplight. So one of our high schools is bigger than all of the schools in my hometown. But we have a lot to take care of. We're feeding 5.5 million kids, and we're just maintaining square footage of 5 million square feet. And that is like 3,000 homes. If you really want to think about how do you compute 5 million square feet, it's like trying to take care of 3,000 homes on a regular basis. So it's a lot to keep care of. All right, how much does it cost for us to maintain our schools? It's really expensive to maintain our schools. Frank Fletcher is our associate superintendent for facilities, and he actually spends we tell him he spends a lot of money, but every year he spends $33 million just maintaining our facilities. That's our maintenance workers, our groundskeepers, our custodians, and the typical supplies that he has, and the utilities that we're spending. We're spending about almost $10 million in utilities. That's just to keep our schools up and running. That's no capital improvements. That's just every year. It's under $7 a square foot that it costs us to maintain our facilities. So what are our needs? Because of all those things, I wanted to start that because it really helps me explain why we have future needs in Chandler. So we definitely need some land. We're going to talk about our needs for our growing school district. We are still growing, but we are going to plateau in the next few years. We need some additional space to maintain our needs here in the district. We have safety measures. All of us are doing that. I mean, the thing we want most is for parents to drop off their kids and feel safe when they leave their child. They think their child needs to be in a safe environment, and we want to provide that. So safety measures are always a top concern for us. Renovations, as I said, after 60% of our schools built in the last 20 years, just like homes, there's a lot of need then that we have to, and a lot of expenses that need to go into maintaining those schools, especially compared to what the community wants. That's the difference. We don't have to put a lot of money back into it, but that's not what our community wants. Our community wants nice schools and great places for their children to go. We have a huge need for technology. We don't have a one-to-one initiative, but we have tons of technology within our school district. It's just extremely expensive. And once we get it, how do we replace it? That's a big problem that we have every time we put more money out. How are we going to replace that? Thank goodness for bonds, because if not, we wouldn't have that money to be able to replace our technology in Chandler at the level that we do now. Transportation, huge need. If we ever get to a point where we transport more than about a fourth of our students, we're going to need double or triple the transportation. One thing some people always ask is, why don't we start schools all at the same time? That would be great for parents. Why aren't schools started at the same time? Well, it's a business decision. We have 3 different start times. We drop off our high school first, then we drop off our elementary, then we drop off our middle school. If I didn't do that, I would need double to triple the buses, because my drivers have 3 different routes that they utilize, or the same route I should say, but 3 different times they're picking up those routes to drop them off at different age appropriate schools. So you see that a lot, and you might even see more in the future, because it's a need, because it helps us financially in our district. First, we can employ those bus drivers, hopefully give them an 8-hour contract, because right now we train them, and then they can go drive a trash truck for 12 months, 8 hours a day, and make more money. So it helps us to maintain our staff, but it also, we don't have to have that capital need, and we're utilizing those buses more. We only drive about 12,000 miles on our buses. If we only went to one spot, one location each day, that would go down to almost probably half or a third, depending on the route. Furniture and equipment, always a need, but hopefully if our capital gets back up there, we won't have as much of a need. We didn't build a lot of furniture and equipment in, except for our new schools. We're hoping to replace that. And then food service, that's a big deal. We try to make money in our food service departments to where they're paying for their upgrades, the new things that they're doing, the food trucks and the pods and the new equipment. But a lot of times if you have a huge renovation, you're going to need your bond to pay for it. So potentially we built a central kitchen in the 80s.